Okay, we've ducked into a little small estuary system down on the New South Wales south coast, and what we're going to do today, we're going to fish some unweighted baits. The reason unweighted baits are so successful is they're probably the most natural way you can present a bait to a fish. So what we're going to do is we're going to prepare a little bit of burley, quite nice and simple, put a bit of burley in the water. We're going to use the current to actually get the fish to come up the burley trail, but not only come into the burley trail but start eating, and then we're going to tantalisingly actually drift some unweighted baits back to them. And the one key for success when you're bait fishing in estuaries or off the beach or off the rocks or wherever that matter is a little bit of burley. There's two systems that I use when I'm burleying. What I do is I actually use a keeper net, and I basically put 2 or 3 pre-prepared blocks of all sorts of bits and pieces, prawn heads, fish guts, whatever you've got left over, chicken frames, anything, pre-freeze them, and then what I do is I drop 2 of them into the burley bag, put that over the side. I call it a burley bag, but it's actually a fish keeper bag you can get pretty much from any tackle shop. Drop that over the side, and what that happens is with the current it flutters around and bits of the burley actually drop off and go through the netting. But on top of that, what I actually add is I actually have a pre-prepared bucket, again of the same sort of stuff, bits of prawn head, whatever you can find, whatever's organic, and a couple of loaves of bread which I water down, crush up, a little bit like when you're fishing off the rocks. And then what I do is mix that burley up, and then I spoon it out to the fish. So we've got a sort of bit of a 2-pronged attack with our burley while we've got our baits out. So what we've done, we've already prepared our bucket. We've got 2 loaves of bread now. We've munched it up. We've made sure we broke the crust up. Thing is, you don't want your crust floating, because what happens, you get seagulls coming down eating your floating crust, and it spooks a lot of the fish, especially the mullet and other fish on up the top of the water column. So make sure you crush all your bread up. So that's all prepared. Now if you don't have any old fish scraps or chicken carcasses or whatever it is lying around the house, the cheapest burley alternative that I've found over the years is just a couple of tins of no-name cheap cat food from your local grocery shop. So not nice, but you mix this in with your bread, and then you've got a little bit of meat and that into your burley. So we're going to get this into our burley. We've already got our burley bag there working away, and it's leaving a nice trail. We've seen a few fish at the back there actually feeding. Hopefully this will add to it and we can start scooping and almost hand feeding our fish. Let's get into it and see if we can't get a few. Right, so when you're burleying, the key is, the most important single factor is you've got to keep that burley trail, because what you're basically doing is you're getting fish from all around the back of the estuary here, actually coming up the burley trail, and they're trying to find the source, and the source is the boat, obviously. So what you want to do is keep that burley trail constant. As soon as you break that burley trail, the fish will actually disappear and they'll follow it back down to away from the boat. So you've got to keep that burley going every now and then. So the key is you're normally looking at a scoop or a couple of scoops every couple of minutes, depending on the current. Obviously, if the current's not running really, really fast, you probably don't need to deploy your burley as frequently. There's no exact science around burleying, but you know, little scoops, you don't want it to give too much. Spread it out a bit so that you're sort of covering a wide range of area, and so that's going to sweep down and hopefully get fish come up into that burley. Oh, have a look. Mullet. No, we don't want mullet on the prawn. Where's that big trevally? There it is, and got it. We had a few mullet come up in the burley right near the back, and then right underneath them we could see a couple of nice trevally. What was happening fishing the unweighted baits, the current was running so fast it was actually forcing my bait on the surface. So what I had to do was almost free spool it back really slowly just to keep it off the surface and under the sort of surface of the water, and bingo, we're in luck. We've come up with looks like a little trevally, I think. One of the important things too when you hook a fish, especially if you're fishing on your own or even if you're in pairs or with a mate, is always remember, keep your burley going when you're catching fish, because that's the first thing people tend to forget. So always have your burley near you, and while you're fighting a fish, make sure you keep that burley going, because you really want to make sure that the fish that are there don't leave. You've got to keep that trail going, don't break it. It's a nice little trevally, not a big fish, but great little fighting fish. Good fun. He's not a bad little south coast trevally, or blurter as they call them. They're actually not bad eating, these fish, when they, if you eat them fresh, quite nice. But I think we'll get the hooks out of this one, let him go. But you can hear him grunting away now. A couple other fish behind us I can hear busting up, so Let's get back into it and see if we can't get something bigger. With our tackle, when we're fishing baits in estuaries, especially when we're fishing unweighted baits or very, very lightly weighted baits, what I'm actually using here is one of the Jarvis X Forces. Fantastic little rod. It's a composite graphite but with a glass tip. So what that means is you've got that nice flexibility and sensitivity in the fiberglass tip, but you've got that little bit of backbone, a little bit of grunt from the composite of the graphite and the fiberglass down lower. It's a really nicely balanced rod. The reel that I'm using is a Jarvis Bullseye X. I've got it spooled up with 6-pound Viros braid. What I actually do is I use about a rod length of mono. The reason I do that is actually the braid's got no give, it's no stretch at all, whereas the mono does have a little bit of stretch. So when you get a nice fish close to the boat and it does that lunge or tries to run away, you've got a little bit of stretch so you don't have the hook rip straight out of the fish's mouth. One of the keys with bait fishing, it's always good to have a mix of baits. So what we've got here is we've got some prawns, we've got a little bit of striped tuna, we've got some pippies that I had from my last beach session, a couple of those there, but also, and probably one of my favourite baits for the last 30 or 40 years, pilly tails or pilly heads. So I've salted these ones down just to make them a little bit tougher. Actually toughens up the skin, and then I put a little bit of tuna oil in with them and then frozen them just in a container, and they're really simple to rig. I actually like using a bait holder hook with the pilchard tails because I just find they actually hold the bait much better and keeps the integrity of the bait when it's actually drifting in the current. And what I actually tend to do is I actually thread these through up about halfway down your bait, thread it all the way through, push the hook all the way through the flesh, and I reconnect it just a little bit lower. I use my thumb to actually push it through, so rather than pull it through where you might rip the bait, I actually push it through with my thumb and then use the end of the hook to twist it. And then what I actually do with my pilly tails is I like to actually do a half hitch. So you put a half hitch in it, so that way it sits like that and flutters quite nicely. The other couple little tips that's worth having is always have a sharp bait knife. That's always crucial. Cutting board so you don't make a mess of your mate's bait, you don't get invited again. The other thing is just an old tea towel or a rag, just to keep your hands clean, and it keeps all the muck and that off your fishing tackle. A lot of people get stuck on using big bait, so if you've got a prawn like that, you put a big prawn out like that, you're a chance of getting a flathead or a brim. But if you want to actually open up all of the species in the system to you, you actually use a smaller bait. So what I do is cut that prawn, you probably get 4 baits out of. And what you actually do when you're fishing a smaller bait is that you're actually replicating exactly the little chunks in your burley as it's floating down. So the fish like a mullet or a trevally, even whiting and species, and even blackfish, species like that tend not to actually feed too much on when you're burleying, you actually catch. So yeah, a tiny little bit of prawn on a small hook, and that's all you really need. You're ready to actually fish. So what I've got here is a tiny little slither of striped tuna. You can see the skin on one side, flesh on the other. When I'm fishing these on an unweighted bait, always go through the skin first, and all you're actually doing is penetrating the skin first, one time through like that. And all you do is you leave your bait sitting like that, and fish will come up, and that's quite a natural looking bait. They'll actually come up, actually grab it from behind and slurp it down. So you don't need to go through 2 or 3 times, and always go through skin first, because what that does, it leaves the point of your hook free of actually accidentally twisting and getting caught in the skin and then potentially not being able to penetrate the fish's mouth. For both the striped tuna, or whether it's a white bait or a little piece of striped tuna, and the prawn baits, I'm using a suicide hook. This one in this case is a size 4, but again, you match your size hook to the species you're chasing, or you match it to the size of your bait. Get a bit of action here, just drop it back a little bit, and you take it and on. The way it's fighting, looks like a nice trevally. A lot of the fish have stayed a long way back in the burley, so I've had to drop this one back. Nice blurter. We're getting a few fish, or quite a few takes, but I wasn't being able to hook up, so I did 2 things. I swapped from the prawn baits, which prawns are quite soft, and I went to a little bit of striped tuna, which are quite tough. They're also very oily fish, so they had They've got their own burley almost within that little bait. They're quite a bit denser than prawns as well, so they sink a bit, and I dropped down a hook size down to a size 4, and it was instant success. So it does pay when you actually are fishing on the estuary. Have a few different baits, you know, some pilchard tails, like little fish, maybe some white bait, some prawns, and then also some striped tuna fillets. So all good to have option, because you never know on what day what might be working best. Fishing unweighted baits in the estuary, it's dead simple. Doesn't matter what time of year it is, it's always effective. A little bit of burley, hook straight to your line, and you'll go home with a nice feed of fish and have a great deal of fun fishing on one of these south coast estuaries. Get this little trevally back, give it a go next time you're out in the water.